Hello, kia ora. I'm hoping everyone's having a great night. I am exhausted already, and I've only just started. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining me. I can see already the comments section has been going absolutely crazy, which is fantastic. So let me give you a quick rundown on what's going to happen tonight. I've got 5 experts who are lined up to come and join me to have a quick chat about what the government's done, because we've had 102 days now of this particular coalition. And in that time, well, they've rushed a few things through. They've kind of degraded democracy an awful lot, and they've made things a lot harder for a lot of people, or they will. Some of their actions haven't come into effect yet, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring in a whole bunch of experts from a whole bunch of different fields. We've got people like Louise Hut. She's a city councillor for Hamilton City, which is one of the cities looking at a really large rates increase because of, well, 3 Waters and having to put that on the books, along with a range of other things. Like, for example, this week, they voted to get rid of about 10 different road safety projects outside of schools because the people of Hamilton want to drive fast, I guess. They don't like speed bumps. And we need to find out whether or not that's something that, is local or has been driven by government, or whether or not things like funding from Waka Kotahi, which this government decided they wanted to cancel when they came into power, have an effect on those kind of decisions and what that means for their funding. We're going to have a chat to Dr. Will Flavel. He's an expert in education. That's what his PhD's in. And we're going to talk to him about whether or not things like cell phone bans are, actually something that's going to work, or if it's as gimmicky as banning gang patches. We're going to have a chat to him as well about whether or not the mandated hour of reading, writing, and arithmetic that this government's put in place is also something that's going to have positive outcomes or negative outcomes, and what the long-term effects are that we're looking at when it comes to our young people going through school. We're going to have a chat as well to Northcote List MP Shannon Halbert, who is the Labour Party spokesperson for rainbow issues, and Auckland City. He also sits on the Māori Affairs Select Committee. Not that select committees actually have much to do at the moment, because again, the government keeps bypassing that particular area of democracy. Then we're going to follow up with Holly Snape. Holly works for an organization called Community Waikato, and they coordinate with a whole bunch of different community groups across different bunches of sectors around the Waikato region. Because every time we seem to get in a government that does things like vilify beneficiaries, for example, those are the community groups that step up and help out. So I'm really interested to see what those sort of community groups are bracing for, what they've already seen in terms of change over the last 100 days. It's going to be a really, I think, eye-opening conversation for people on that one. And then finally, we're going to be closing off with Pat Brittenden, who's from Big Hearing News. I know he's watching at the moment because I've already seen the messages pop up, and I think I've just retweeted something he put out on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. And we're going to be talking about media. In the last 100 days, there's been a lot of news around the news itself, with the closure of News Hub, the downsizing of TVNZ, and what that actually means, because the media has a really important role. I know for me, the content that I make, I use snippets and clips from the media because I know they have to go through certain legal checks before they can be put up on to any kind of broadcast or any kind of print. And so it's really important that we've got those. Otherwise, you end up with people like Chantal Baker, citizen journalists as they call themselves, who just rant and ramble and don't actually do much in the way of providing news, just providing their perspective. And that can be really dangerous if that's where people are getting their information from. So that's the plan for tonight. Now, if you want to ask questions, you're more than welcome to. I see everything coming through at the moment in the chat, which is always really good to see. I will try and get to them, but I can't guarantee it. So I apologize if that's the case. But the guests who are watching will hopefully see some of the comments come through as well and might be able to answer those separately. Or we could look at getting them on in a future episode and go from there. So that's pretty much the game plan so far. But I figured now's a really good time as well to give you a bit of a heads up about what's happened today, because the last 100 days, it's felt like an onslaught. There's something new every day from this government, and it's not all bad, but the good stuff, believe it or not, doesn't get much airing. Like the fact that they've gone to make moves already to increase the age for people getting breast cancer screening. They started that process already, but you don't hear about that because it gets drowned out by other things. And that can be really scary. Like, it might be something like Chris Bishop on Q&A this morning saying, yep, we're deliberately disrupting the system that they're in charge of. So they can't actually disrupt it. Or Chloe taking out the Green Party leadership, which I think is going to scare a lot of people in those right-wing parties because she's really popular with the left-wing voters and she's always there with the facts. So I suspect it's going to be one of those things that they're going to make a lot of noise about. I know David Seymour's already started yapping because it's David Seymour. But even then, you get the conversation that Winston Peters has had around things like hurricane Poa and their use of haka as a form of protest. I mean, who would have guessed that haka would be intimidating? I mean, that's literally the point of it. But the conversations that we seem to see crop up, particularly with New Zealand First and ACT, are very much, you can have free speech as long as you say what it is that I want you to say. And that's really, really problematic for any form of government. On top of that, you've got, again announced today, property investors being able to regain the ability to claim interest costs. And they're going to be backdating it. In the first year, they can only get 80% of their costs. In the second year, it's 100%. So landlords apparently are going to get tax rebates. And in theory, we're going to have our rents come down. I don't see it happening, to be honest. And of course, you've got to deal with the rather foot and mouth diseased ridden prime minister that we have at the moment. His days of treating us like taxpayer ATMs apparently is over because he says it is. But at the same time, he's still claiming the largest amount of rebate for any electorate office in a 3-bedroom house he converted across the road from a bunch of offices and commercial areas. So yeah, it's a bit of a concern when that happens. Let me just show you something that Spider Hoof's put through, actually. This is a really good point. Calculated the cost of cancer screening at the time, and it came to approximately $500 per annum in funding. Is that $500 per person? 500 million all up? Or is it just not much funding at all is needed to do what they said that they're going to do? Be very interested to see that one. Something about cameras. I'll deal with that one shortly. One of the other things that you should probably be aware of is just how much has been done under urgency by this government, which is a lot. This government has put through under urgency more than any government under MMP ever in its first 100 days. And it's also really important to note about the 100-day thing that it's made up. Like there's nothing to it. It's just a nice round number that they can say, we're going to get things done by. And the government has very much used that as an excuse to push through everything that they've pushed through. 19 laws, I believe it is, pushed through under urgency. And some of them were time constraints. So they had to get it in before it kicked into the new year, for example. But others, like hiding a report on tax fairness, that wasn't something that was on the cards. It wasn't something that was campaigned on. It was something they felt was really, really important to make sure nobody saw just before it came out. And that's a concern. That should be a really big concern for everyone because we want a fair tax system and we want to make sure that our tax system is collecting the money that's needed to look after the country and get things done. There's probably no real reason for everything to have been done under urgency. Some things maybe, but not everything. But that's one of the things that we'll have a discussion with Shannon about, who is, I believe, cooking us a roast for dinner. I'm pretty sure he said us. I'm pretty sure he invited all of us. So I guess we can find out where we're having dinner when he jumps on the call a little bit later. So yeah, it's a really strange 100 days. I'd be really curious to know what you guys think of what's happened so far. Is there anything that actually, you think is a good thing that they've done in the last 100 days? Do you feel that democracy is at threat by using urgency and cutting down select committee processes or anything like that? Like the new fast track environmental bill, for example, that they've put in place, that sounds kind of scary because, they're doing everything they can to basically forego decisions and not let people have their say. And if you saw the interview today with Jack Tame, that was really eye-opening. Like, that was really, really eye-opening. So it was, let's have a look. What city town is Shannon in? Just wondering if I can get there for dinner. I would assume he is here on the North Shore somewhere at the moment, being a Sunday. I don't think parliamentarians fly down until Monday usually. So I'm guessing he's probably not far from me, actually, but I don't know exactly where Shannon lives. I can't tell you. I'm sorry. And I don't know what kind of roast it is either. So No details on that one. Not at all. What's Sam got to say? That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. That was a weird one, actually, because I've been doing work with Auckland Council, and the day that happened, it was just absolute shock for everybody. Like it was, I think it is a measure of the man, just how much impact he had, that even people who are working in things like the operations team were impacted by what happened. It's very sad, of course. Let's see. Tama puts this up: according to the Bishop, only public get to say once every 3 years. And this is the most common question I get, is how do we put in for a new election? And the answer is we don't. That's literally how the democratic process is set up in this country. There are only 2 people in the entire world who can have a vote of no confidence in our government. One is the Governor General, and the other is King Charles III. And neither of them are going to ever exercise that right because they don't like what a government is doing. It's only ever done under incredibly extreme circumstances. So it's not likely to be something that we see happen anytime soon. So we kind of only have the recourse of waiting until the next election. There are things that you can do, though, between now and the next election. For example, we know it's a really fragile coalition. It's why National gave away everything during the coalition talks, and ACT in New Zealand First can get away with feeling like they can say anything or suck all the oxygen out of the room. It's kind of scary, actually, how that works. But if we keep poking holes at them, if we keep upsetting the apple cart, and if we wait for a time when somebody says something really stupid that's going to put strain on that relationship, that could trigger a by-election if they lose, or another snap election if they lose the confidence of the House. I don't like our chances because they're stubborn and they don't listen to people anyway. Like, it's ridiculous. I'm sorry, dude. I'll see if he can send you down like a doggy bag or something like that. It's, yeah. Mr. Arvids, I feel so violated by this whole 100 days, like it doesn't matter extra on top of how I felt for years. I know where you're coming from there. Like, yeah, it's stupid microphone in the way. Checking my messages because Louise shouldn't be too far away. Come on, Louise. But yeah, it's been a rush job. Like it has felt like a rush job. So yeah, the Governor General does see what they're doing, but the Governor General, like the King, has to be impartial. They are there to sign things off, essentially. So they don't get involved in the actual politics of stuff. What the Governor General does on a day-to-day basis, like all the appointments and stuff like that, is also generally signed off by the Office of the Prime Minister, not the Prime Minister's staff, but the Office of the Prime Minister, which is different, to keep them impartial, essentially. So they basically have to bite their tongue. If it turned out that, the country was literally about to fall over, or hundreds of people were about to die because of a decision that the government had made, and it was really clearly obvious that that was what's going to happen, and it was really clearly obvious it was deliberate, maybe then, but it's not likely to do much. I disagree. Just as the current coalition is breaking things to pillage our lands, we can also break things like being able to overthrow the government. That is actually, to be fair, that is an option. Overthrowing the government has been done in many countries around the world. It is not always the best way to go about things. We like to think, I saw this the other day actually, we like to think of ourselves as being a really civilized country, but we've also never as a country had to deal with things like the rise of fascism. So people here don't recognize the steps that happen for the rise of a fascistic government. And we're on that path in a lot of ways, in the way that we have, ministers, for example, talking about media control and free speech and what can and can't be said. That kind of stuff is the stepping stone towards fascism. So we need to be really wary of that. And if you talk to people from anywhere else in the world who's ever had to deal with fascism, that's when you come across this issue as well, where they'll be sitting there going, why can't you see what's going on? But in hindsight, it's easier to see these things. In other ways, not so much. Like sometimes it can be very, very concerning how little we actually notice these things. All right, what's Char got to say? Why is this corrupt coalition government rushing everything through? They're on a mission to annihilate everything. And that's a really good point here as well. They had 49 things that they wanted to achieve in their 100 days. And of that, 30 of them were repealing or cancelling or getting rid of things that the previous government had done. They keep saying it was moving forward, but it's really hard to move forward when you're literally taking things backwards. And I think a lot of people realize that, and a lot of people don't care. And that That really sucks. Here's another interesting one for you. Royal veto has only been used in Canada twice, simply because the legislation to sign didn't go through 3 readings. That makes a lot of sense. Be very interested to see if our Governor General would do something like that here, but I can't see it happening, to be honest. Our Governor General is very good at sitting down and being quiet and, showing up and signing things or cutting things and stuff like that. It's a shame the Governor General cannot intervene about the fast tracking, ministers having the ultimate power. And that is part of the problem as well. Like, our democracy is set up with stops and checks and balances. That's part of the reason why we go through several readings and select committee processes and stuff like that. It's to make sure that people can have their say and that there are checks and balances put in place to make sure that things are legal, for example. Like the gang patch issue, where that popped up as being possibly illegal because it's a breach of human rights, because it's about a freedom of expression. Those kind of rushed policies can and do cause problems in the past. It's a very, very tricky problem. What's this one from saying? If you want a real peasant revolt vibe for the revolution, you want a hay fork, not a pitchfork. What's the difference? I actually don't know what the difference is. I also don't know where you'd find a pitchfork or a hay fork these days. They're not particularly common. So I don't know. Very, very curious. What else we got? Governor General in Australia in 1975 removed the sitting. That's right, they did too. I do remember hearing about that. So, like, the Governor General has a lot of power. We know the King's never going to do anything, if anybody knows what the King is actually up to at the moment. But it is not likely that Charles is going to step in and do anything while he's dealing with cancer. So it's down to the Governor General. You could always lobby her and see what she says, but I'm pretty sure they're going to come back and say, nah, not at all. New Zealand, the UK, and Israel, I think, are the only countries without a codified constitution. So weird things can happen. Yep, absolutely right, Peter. We are a unique country in the way that we were set up and founded, and that's led to some issues over the last 180 odd years because of what tertidity was and how it's been interpreted over time. But I think it makes us special. It makes us really special. Makes it. One of the things I actually noticed when I was overseas last year, when I went to Manila, they have a museum there that deals specifically with their colonial past, because they've been invaded a few times over the years. And it sort of struck me that we're kind of lucky that while we have tertidity, and there's always going to be people who have different interpretations of what that is, we at least have a guiding document. And so it is one of those things that, it gives us some foothold to be able to move forward together and work together towards outcomes. Whereas other places in the world that have had to deal with the violence of colonialism so much more than we have, and the after effects of that, they haven't had that path to follow. They haven't had that guiding principle to deal with. So we're actually really lucky, I think, to have something like tertidity. So see, the King is a proponent of pseudoscience. I did not know that. Like, I knew he was a little bit sort of hippy-dippy, as it were, but yeah, nothing else. I'm going to flick Louise a quick message and just go, yo, what's up? Coming? Where are you? Where you at? Tell you what, while we wait for Louise, let's have a chat to Dr. Will Flavel. Kia ora, Dr. Will.
Kia ora, Paul. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you holding up?
It's a beautiful Sunday evening here in Tamaki Makaurau here in West Auckland, so I'm holding up well.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I was actually over there a couple of weeks ago with you. It was a beautiful night. Beautiful place to be.
Best place to be in Auckland, I reckon.
Absolutely. Not gonna disagree with you on that one. Hey, tell me. Education is obviously your field of expertise. We've seen a lot of education changes coming through from this government, cell phone bans, for example, or reading, writing, and arithmetic, that kind of stuff being mandated. In your expert opinion, is it going to work? What are the outcomes that we're looking at?
Yeah, I think let's start off with food in schools, because I think that's to be the topic that our young people are talking about. So I've been working in a number of schools over the last 6 weeks for 3 days a week, And recognizing that's the big topic that young people are talking about. They're talking about it because the school that I'm currently working at, there's a long line every interval and every lunchtime waiting for the lunches and the morning tea. And so there's a strong need at the particular school that I'm working at here in West Auckland. And so for the young people to hear that the option that the government may take is to get rid of the free food for the young people, that's actually causing a little anxiety and stress for our young people here in West Auckland. And so that's probably the biggest issue related to our young people. But there's also a number of topics that you picked on, the cell phone ban. That's quite difficult. And also the reading and writing is also another interesting issue that this government has put forward.
With the free lunches program, because that's something that came in after I was at school, so I'm not sure exactly how it works. Is it everybody in the school gets it, or is there they can opt into it? How does the system actually work?
Yeah, so schools that are lower decile can opt in to have the free food, and everyone is entitled at that particular school, at the school. And so morning tea and lunch is provided for students. So the school that I'm currently working at has options of a hot meal and perhaps a food roll and fruit and pretzels and things like that. Hearing stories also that many of our young people don't have, I guess, the food at home at times. So this is guaranteed kai, and we know how important kai is for learning needs. I certainly can't learn or interact when I'm hungry. No doubt our growing young people can't also do the same. And so with the high cost of living, which pockets of West Auckland are struggling with the high cost of living, it's actually essential that we have these programs in our schools available.
With the other changes that the government's signaling for education sector, for the things around the cell phone ban, for example, do you know what the research says about that? Like, is this research backed like they claimed?
Yeah, I don't think so. And the government tends to only listen to one or two researchers that align with their political values and views. As a secondary school teacher, I like to use cell phones in the classroom. I think it's really important to enhance technology. And so, for example, you may use your cell phone as a calculator. You may use your cell phone to play the interactive games that teachers tend to play, like Kahoot, for example. And also, it's imperative that young people have access to a device. Most students do have a Chromebook or a laptop of some sort. But if students don't have a Chromebook, then it's really important, for example, that they have a cell phone, that you can use a cell phone to Google, use a cell phone to take photos necessary for what they're doing in the classroom. So cell phones provide a resource that's really important for our young people. So to get this rule from the government, I think it was a silly idea. I think it's up to schools how they should how cell phones are used in the classroom. I'm a fan of for students to put their phones away in the classroom and to asked or instructed by the teacher. And I think that's probably more important that the government actually gives the authority to schools and how cell phones are used or operated in their respective school.
Did they have that already?
Absolutely, yes, they did.
Okay.
So, I have to be honest. When I was in the staff room and it was announced by one of the deputy principals that this is the new mandate, there was lots of groans by the teachers because they understand that this is a rule that is a silly idea. Schools have already procedures in place. Why not let schools do what they think what they know what's best for the young people instead of a silly silly idea mandated by this government.
In terms of feedback from the students, has there been much? Like, have you heard anything from them about these rule changes?
Yeah, it's really interesting because with the cell phone rule in particular, you and I know how young people are so attached to their phones. It's like a third arm for many of our young people. So we've got
not just them.
Well, unfortunately for us as well. So we know how important that device is for young people. I think when you have when there's media coverage around taking away rights from young people and the rights for young people to have access to their phones or cell phones, that can be quite problematic. And I know there can be a lot of issues that schools or parents or teachers may have with cell phone use. And I know sometimes it can, students do tend to use cell phones inappropriately. But I think it's still best that schools have the authority and have the power to determine how cell phones are used best in the classroom. And I know that needs to be supported by the parents and whānau.
How much of an impact do you think this first 100 days has had on the outlook for students?
I think not great. Not great in the sense that we need to be empowering young people. We actually need ideas from the young people on how best to what a perfect education system looks like for young people. I think I'm a big fan of student voice. I'm a big fan of co-construction, where young people have the ability to get the ideas on what a perfect education system could look like for them. Unfortunately, within this 100 days, the ideas that this current government have don't specifically align with the values of our young people, and that's a great loss. I think also of, you talked about the compulsory 1 hour reading and writing. Again, schools are already doing this. The whole idea of back to basics, I don't even know what that means. I don't know any school that doesn't have reading and writing every day. It's such a normal routine in the lives of what we do in schools. So I feel there's definitely disconnect between the education system and this current government.
One last question for you then. What sort of prediction do you think you could make about how students are going to feel at the end of this term, the next 1,000 days?
Yeah, so I'm looking really carefully on what happens with the food in schools. Let me tell you this, our young people will be very visible in terms of how they feel if, for example, the food in schools was taken away. But it was really interesting, even during the election time last year, the National Party did say that the food in schools was something that would not go away. So it's really interesting, I guess, with the coalition and one of the coalition partners, questioning the costs related to the food in schools. But that's not something you can, you should put a cost on. It's so important that our young people have access to food in order to be able to learn and have the best opportunities they can have during school time.
Fantastic. Dr. Will Flavel, thank you very much for your time tonight. It is very much appreciated. I'll let you go back to enjoying the beautiful night over there.
Kia ora, Paul. Nice to see you.
Thank you. You too. Talk soon. All right, so next guest going to bring in is Louise Hut, Hamilton City Councillor. Good evening, Louise. How are you?
Kia ora, Paul. I'm good. How are you?
Oh, yeah. Been a busy couple of days.
Yep.
I've actually walked 12 kilometers over the last 2 days with different events that I've been on. So it's been a little crazy, absolutely crazy. But you've also had a fairly stressful last couple of days by the sound of it.
I have. And you'll have to excuse my extra special guest who's doing his usual Sunday night gaming in the background. This is
Fair
what
enough.
a real city councillor looks like in their office with their partner gaming in the background. But yeah, it's been a really just hectic week in my life. This week at Hamilton City Council, we cancelled 10 transport projects, most of them outside of schools. Can't say I'm particularly proud of that decision. But, a lot of this is flow-on effects from the position statements of the new government who
So
don't
one
want
of
to
the
fund
first things that
walking, cycling.
Yeah, well, they made that really clear last week. And when they first got into power, one of the very first things they did was told Waka Kotahi stop all funding for those kind of projects. As somebody who has to make those decisions about where that funding goes and what that funding is reliant on when you make the applications for it, how has the feedback been from voters, from your constituents about these sudden changes?
It's pretty gutting. It's one of those things where people are mad at city council for lots of reasons. lots of them really valid reasons,
Mhm.
but it really doesn't help our relationship with the community when we go out and we consult on projects and we're like, hey, we're going to put some new infrastructure in. What do you think about it? We've got this money from the government. Sometimes it's 51% funded, sometimes it's 100% funded
Mhm.
in terms of our latest like surf projects. And so when the government actually goes, haha, just kidding, can you actually like scrap those projects, and can you go back and tell the community that you guys are a bunch of big liars and you're not going to be doing this project at all? Especially with pedestrians and cyclists, like those communities are often really afraid of changes not happening because of what it means for
Mhm.
them, and simply moving around the city. So it's not great for our relationship with communities.
So I've actually had a question come in here that raises a really good point for you. What ability does local government have to just say no?
It's one of those things where you really learn about who has true power and who doesn't. We signed contracts with the government. Like in any other like part of society, if you'd be like, this is our contract, please like honor it. When it's the government and you're the government's little brother, and they can just be like, well, just kidding. It's kind of like, well, what can we do? Can we take the government to court and be like, no, please fill this out? It's really challenging to push back on it, and especially when the relationship is so wide-reaching.
Mhm.
Council's relationship with our rates as our primary form of income is so broken, so we really want the government to come in and be like, hey, could you like give us the GST back on rates, or could you like give us a portion of the tax funding, like could you give us any kind of proper income? If we're like digging our heels in over here about a transport project, but we're actually over here being like, could we have a city deal? We're really well behaved, we promise. It's like, it's a really challenging relationship, honestly. And yeah, you really figure out who has like true power.
One of the big things that hit the news when this government first got into power was around Three Waters. One of the very first things sent out by the new Minister of Local Government, Simeon Brown, was, it's your problem now. That led to many councils around the country looking at a massive increase in rates because suddenly they have to put this infrastructure back onto their books. How has that gone down? Do people understand what the cause of that issue is?
It's honestly this kind of like bizarre scenario in some ways where conversations that I've been a part of have been like, city council's been like, we've got lots of reasons to not like Three Waters, we're not sure about this. The list is this long, and you're kind of like, okay, well, in lots of ways it seemed like a good deal, guys. Like, sure, have your reservations, but I don't know, it seemed like better than nothing. And then now it's kind of I was in a conversation where the sort of recommendation pitched back to us was like, so it would be so great if we could like voluntarily join with other councils to make an alternative like water entity, and like the more councils, the bigger the councils, the better, because then we can borrow more. And it's like, guys, was that not the pitch of Three Waters? Like,
Okay, so
okay,
I'm
so
going to do
you wanted to
something.
do the math. You wanted to do the math, and you came back out at the same answer. Like, okay.
I'm going to shake things up a little bit here because I've actually got Shannon Halbert in the waiting room at the moment, who's a Labour Party MP.
Yes.
And I'm going to bring him in because I can see his expressions when you're explaining what's being put on offer here. Kia ora, Shannon. Good evening. How was the roast?
Kia ora, Paul. My roast was pretty good, actually. It's a bit of a tradition in my household, and it's my favourite place to be on the weekend, just to chill out and cook some good kai.
Fair enough. Now, you heard what Louise just said about Three Waters and what councils have been brought back up with. As Minister for Auckland, or ministerial spokesperson for Auckland, which obviously has something a little different in terms of water and what's needed here because it would be tied in with Northland, and Auckland already has water care in place. What's the feedback that you've been getting from councils around this new offer? Have you been getting feedback from any of the councils around this new offer?
Yeah, people are sort of telling me that it's part of the the series of broken promises, I guess, that people are experiencing from this government. When we talked about cost of living relief, that's not really what people are feeling or seeing in the decisions that have been made in the 100-day plan. For those people that are living in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, we're facing a 23% increase in our water rates, and that's the reality of not moving forward with water reform with Entity A. But I actually think it's a much sadder story for places like Northland. How the heck are they going to upgrade their water infrastructure without the support of Aucklanders? And no doubt there's other places around the country in smaller areas where people just won't pick up these smaller communities to help them to be where they need to be. So it's a sad occasion, but one of many broken promises.
Louise, one final question for you. We've had 100 days of this government so far. What do you think has been the biggest impact for you as a councillor on their decisions so far?
Probably the most... Paul, could you have asked me an easier question? I'd say...
I'm sorry.
Partly I'd say the Three Waters repeal. Partly the RMA walk back as well. Partly also just these changes to the GPS as well. I mean, all of those are just massive for councils, and it's going to be a hard road ahead.
It is. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll let you get back to what you're writing because I know it's going to be very impressive. Where can people find you?
You can find me. I was writing an Instagram post before, so you can find a brand new Instagram post if you head over there. I'm also on Facebook, and if you're really desperate, you can try me on Twitter, but I'm not there as much anymore.
I know that feeling. Awesome. Thank you very much, Louise. You have a great night.
No worries.
Again, Shannon, thank you very much for joining me. You've got a lot on your plate at the moment. It sort of came in a little bit late to the term because of the shift around on the list with Calvin disappearing. How are you finding it so far?
Well, my friend, there's a few benefits to sitting at home for a couple of months reflecting while people return to Parliament. I had the chance, I guess, to look at the contribution that I want to make as a politician moving forward. But it really hurts, actually, when you're sitting at home watching Parliament TV and repeal after repeal after repeal sort of coming through in urgency. Those are the things that really concerned me. But, where I want to make the contribution going forward. So I was lucky enough to be given the Auckland Issues portfolio for Labour. I'm really keen to start talking again about our vision for Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. How do we be the most productive global city that we can possibly be, where the aspirations of our young people are, at the centre of what's important to us. And, for me, that's about investing in good quality infrastructure.
The infrastructure in Tāmaki is an interesting one because a large chunk of it's obviously funded through the regional fuel tax, which is disappearing. And then the government's decided to put another 22 cents or something like that onto fuel for the next term in one lump sum, which was something the Labour Party was going to do over 3 years over the next term, so it didn't hit quite so hard. Have you had much feedback from Auckland Council or from Aucklanders around the loss of that revenue stream for them?
Yeah, on Wednesday, we actually repealed the bill through urgency. We fought really hard in the discussion and debate. I guess when we think about it, do Aucklanders want to pay a regional fuel tax? At face value, of course we don't. We're in a cost of living crisis. But what happened in the same week was that the government announced additional taxes, of which are, an additional $50 to registering a car and 22 cents of fuel excise tax come 2025. And the reality is that suddenly there are no savings for Aucklanders and no money, or $1.7 billion hole in investment in our core infrastructure. The feedback that we saw from Auckland Council was, of course, the cancellation of 12 key infrastructure projects in our transport network in Auckland. We all know that congestion is our biggest bloody problem in the city. It impacts on our productivity and therefore our economy. It impacts on our mental health. And so, as a government, Labor put forward the regional fuel tax because we knew we needed to fund the upgrade of our transport infrastructure. And what's happened here is that the new government has put up the roads of national significance, which is not a solution to resolving.
They can't even come up with an original name.
You know, and so what it does for a city like ours, a global city, and if you look offshore and you think about all of the transport options available to us, suddenly this government's narrowed the view and says, well, all of you are going to go in your car, and we're going to increase the tax for you to take your car, and we're not going to invest in rail and walking and cycling. You know, what sort of global city operates like that? It's crazy.
It depressed me so much when I got back in the country in December, and there's no train to the CBD from the airport, and it's a simple thing that seems everywhere. And I got back, I think, the day they announced the cancellation of light rail, and I'm just like, it hurt. Like, you go from somewhere like Sydney Central, where light rail is essential for getting people around and really popular, to somewhere like here where it should work so well, and it just keeps being kicked down or then cancelled, and it becomes way too political. It is really out of it. I've got a question that's just popped up here for you.
Just before we go that question, the one I also wanted to double down on kind of affects communities like ours in public transport, where we had put up investment to fund half price public transport and free public transport for under 13s. You know, those are the types of cost of living measures that tangibly.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. Oh, we seem to have lost your audio there, Shannon. Sound's gone. I don't know why. It's terrible. Technical issues crop up all the time, and I'm going to blame the Wi-Fi here on the shore. It's what's causing it. A quick question for you then about rainbow rights, because you're the spokesperson for that as well. This party has already said that they want to look at limiting funding for amateur sports if they don't put in specific issues and issue-solving cases, apparently, for trans women in particular, not trans people, as well as getting rid of things like RSE in schools, which has been shown to have really positive effects, particularly for the rainbow community. Why do you think this is such a priority for them when they tell us, you know, cost of living is what we need to focus on, but they do bullshit like this?
Yeah, well, what's that line that Winston Peters used? Get an education, you know, and this is the same. Their attack on marginalized people in this country is absolutely shocking. It's mean-spirited, and it's not in line with the overall priorities of what the general population actually voted for in the last election. And I think, you know, that general population is now thinking, is this what we voted for? We're a bit confused by the priorities of this government. We thought we were getting cost of living relief. But when it comes back to that core issue about trans women, it really highlights the lack of understanding from this government, you know, and I'll start with there's no representation across those three parties of our rainbow community, and therefore nobody advocating for our rainbow community and the decisions that this government is making. Absolutely shocking. And you know, we are Aotearoa New Zealand. We believe in representation, diversity, and inclusion. The second part there is you know, in that mean-spirited leadership that they call it, is that they aren't consulting with groups. And so no matter which decision or piece of legislation that they are repealing, they've blocked the opportunity for Kiwis to be able to have their say, to feedback on the decisions that they're making. And, you know, urgency is one tool of how they're blocking the public voice from feeding back in this sense. Yesterday was another march. We did the Pride March in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, you know, which was really advocating for some of the key issues. Our trans people was in there, Toitu Te Tiriti, as well, freeing Palestine, and Mana Takatapui. And this leads on from Auckland's Pride Month in February. And people genuinely care about these issues. And so the government hasn't given, apart from their mean-spirited one-liner that's designed to attract some sort of votes in the election, they really haven't come out with anything strong, decisive about what they're going to do in this space. But, you know, they've actually done the damage that they intended to do. They have discriminated and marginalised trans women in this, you know, to win part of an election. And now they have to decide what the heck that they're going to do with it. Sadly, our rainbow community is impacted by that.
One last question for you. We're 100 days in, and it's obviously been a very hectic 100 days for you with everything being rushed through under urgency. What does the next 1,000 odd days of this term sort of foreshadow for the rest of us?
Let's really hope, you know, and I like to be optimistic and quite positive. And politics aside, if the government was coming out with the actual thing that people voted for in this election, which was cost of living relief, I can stomach that, Paul. I can work with the promises that they've made, appreciate that there's different ways that different governments achieve particular goals, but where it really matters, no matter what community that we are talking to, people are wanting cost of living relief. And what we're seeing, you know, an announcement today, which is giving tax relief to landlords in the millions. You know, we see a 2% increase in the minimum wage when the recommendation was 4%. So I suspect that we're going to see more of that, that we will effectively start to prioritise those that are quite privileged. And I hope that New Zealand responds to that. And some of the chitter-chatter that I experience at the cafe and walking down our streets at the moment is that people are really concerned at some of these decisions. So, you know, it's a narrow-minded government.
Regretted their vote?
Say that again?
Have you had many people tell you they regretted their vote?
Yes, but more share their concerns. And sometimes this is where I recognise that people did vote for this government, and they are quite confused about what they've actually got for that.
Fantastic. Shannon, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I'll let you go back and finish off the rest of the roast. I'm sure there's a few leftovers to be picking at, because that's what I'd be doing.
I'm really stoked to join in your session tonight. Thanks so much, Paul. Good to see you.
I'm really glad to have you here, mate. I'll catch up with you later. Thank you. All right, and next person I get to bring in is Holly. How you going, Holly?
I'm doing very well, Paul. Good to see you.
You too. And I've got Pat sitting in the waiting room as well, because I see people in the questions going, where's Pat? He's coming up very soon, I promise. I'm just running a little behind schedule because everyone is amazing to talk to. Community Waikato obviously deals with a lot of community organizations around the region. How are they feeling after 100 days of this coalition?
You know, it's actually a hard question because, you know, the work for the community sector is always difficult. You know, traditionally, people have done a lot of additional hours. There's been underfunding of the sector for many, many years. I think it was 2019. Piece of research came out that the sector was underfunded through government contracts alone by $630 million annually. And, you know, that hasn't shifted. But what we're seeing, I think, with the conversations I'm having with how things have shifted under this new government is there's a sense of hope just disappearing. There is real concern around the rhetoric that has felt very anti-Māori, and it's reinforced through the undoing of quite a bit of legislation. So the He Puapua, the Te Akawhai order repeal, to Tiratia Waitangi review, you know, even Three Waters with the attack on that concept of co-governance, they are all contributors to this this rhetoric and this narrative that is really negatively impacting, you know, Māori. So I think that that is something that's a real concern for the community sector. You know, I was listening to your previous guests as well, and everything they were saying, I was yes, because of course it all impacts us as well. And I was particularly struck by the conversation around lunches in schools. And I think, it came out at a really interesting time, of course, where Luxon was claiming his entitlement of $52,000 a year for a house he didn't have to pay any money on, and then questioning the entitlement of children to access to food. And that is in itself very difficult. But I think there's a context to food security that it's really important to understand at the moment as well. And so through the sector, there was pretty significant funding over COVID for food through communities, and it was fantastic. It's actually never been quite that way before. And of course, that highlighted the depth of food insecurity across the country. And I don't think there were the increased food needs that it necessarily looked like in terms of the reflection of people picking up that food. It was just that so many barriers were removed for people being able to access food. I think there's so much greater food insecurity than what generally we understand. So, we've got a context of food insecurity in this country, increased costs of living, increased costs of food. Food in schools is a fundamental part of making sure children are getting health and nutrition. Biggest belief that you would even question that.
Does it surprise you that the person who's questioning that is David Seymour?
No. No,
Okay.
Sadly it does not. And there are lots of things he's saying and doing that don't surprise me, but it saddens me.
In terms of the groups that you work with, are there any out there that are feeling positive or hopeful or optimistic?
That's not the feeling I have had so far, to be
Okay.
honest. I'll tell you about an interesting conversation I had last week. We had a cross-sector hui. So we had environment, wellbeing, community, creative sectors coming together to talk about what longer-term resilience looks like outside of a crisis. So how do we plan before a crisis? That was the gist of it. But I was having some conversations with people from our rural communities about what they're seeing as a result of these first 100 days. And, such an interesting unintended consequence has been around this 7.5% reduction in public service costs, only, of course, back office costs. So that you would think shouldn't have a frontline impact. Well, what our rural communities are seeing is that public service providers, people who might come into communities like ACC to have, counsellors through, special claims and the likes, IRD, just, the range of different services that would often go into communities are not travelling because they don't have travel budgets. So all of a sudden, our rural communities are actually not able to access the same kinds of services that they were before. And I think that is such an interesting and concerning unintended consequence. We see how they're impacted by lots of these sort of centralised decisions at times. But this, has such significant potential consequence.
But the ACT Party, they were allowed to wear gumboots in the house for a day to show solidarity to farmers. Surely that fixes everything.
Surely. It's really difficult when you think how seriously these people actually take the lives of people who are actually just doing it tough. I don't think they actually genuinely understand what it is to walk a day in someone else's shoes.
For the people out there, I've got the question up on the screen here about wanting to get involved and stuff like that with community groups. Are community groups looking for more help from people at the moment with what's happened in the last 100 days or what they're expecting?
I think community organisations so often are needing additional support. In the last few years, probably last decade or so, we've seen a change in the way that people like to volunteer. And volunteerism is such a fundamental part of how organisations exist, right? But we find now that people don't sort of come along and do the, the regular, perhaps 1 day a week or 4 hours a week or whatever. They rather come in for a project and go out again, which is absolutely fine and always welcome. But I would absolutely suggest looking around at who you have in your local communities, figuring out what you're really passionate about too, because it really helps to connect with a passion, whether that be feeding kids or looking after animals, fostering dogs like I like to do, whatever it is that really gets you excited, and make an approach. But often in many of the at least larger communities, there will be organisations like Volunteering Waikato, Volunteering Bay of Plenty, Volunteering Auckland, and they are a wonderful place to connect to a wide range of community organisations over a wide range of skills or needs.
Fantastic. I think we're going to leave it there, Holly. Thank you very much for joining me. Very much appreciated. I will catch up with you next time I'm down in Kirikiriroa. We'll have a drink.
Ka kite anō.
Thank you very much. Catch you later. Right. And finally, Pat, the expert who says he's not an expert.
Hey, how are you? This is very strange.
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. What's up?
Chatting, catching up with people, the usual. Just chilling, relaxing.
Yeah.
That
No, it's
kind
been
of
good,
thing.
bro. Been listening.
I've enjoyed it. It's been an exhausting weekend for me, but I've enjoyed sitting down doing this. And
I heard you bragging about 12Ks. I've actually walked 12.2Ks, so I've done more. No,
well,
it's actually a lie. I'm lying. It's not true at all.
But that actually raises a really interesting point, because this is an online live stream which isn't subject to things like Broadcasting Standards Authority or any kind of rules in place around honesty and integrity, unlike the media that we've seen kind of shit itself over the last couple of days. Right. What's your thoughts and feelings on the media landscape as it is at the moment?
I'm kind of torn, because it is a real major concern to see things like News Hub go down and for TVNZ to be making cutbacks. But I also know why. The media landscape in New Zealand in general has had a broken advertising and money-making model for a very, very, very long time. We seem to follow along. In fact, I've had meetings with people who wear big hats in big media organisations who will remain nameless, who actively say, we follow along 5 years behind America. And I saw it when I was in radio. There was a big push for digital radio overseas, especially in the UK. And I was like, this will never come here. Because the reason it'll never come here is it's not just the digital media or the digital radio, like, Sirius and that kind of stuff. But it then has to go into cars, which is where most people listen to it. It then has to flow into the second-hand market, and then you might get uptake. But New Zealand's so small and technology was moving so fast. The big wigs in the media companies were worried about it. And those of us down the bottom were like, it'll skip that and it'll go straight to internet. And it's exactly what it's done. So now people just listen and watch on the internet. We didn't quite foresee all of this, but it seemed fairly obvious that the model for getting messages out was going to skip digital radio in New Zealand and go straight to the internet. I mean, like I said, I'm not saying I knew about all this kind of stuff, but but listening to the radio on the internet and that sort of thing. And so what the media in New Zealand right now is doing is playing advertising and sponsorship of 2015, 2010, 2005. And if you ever look internationally what's happening with things like what we're doing in Big Hairy News, that model offshore is common and you don't see it in New Zealand, which means you don't have an advertising model for it because they're holding on to the last of it. You get groups like MediaWorks who have Rover, which is a podcasting platform, but the only reason they make money is they sell advertising packages to clients and then they include radio advertising. So advertise on this podcast and we'll throw in this radio advertising as well. And because the big guys, NZME and MediaWorks, particularly in the podcasting space, are sort of doing that, the audience, the advertising audience is not being retrained in a better way to do it. And so all of those things put together mean at some stage, the advertiser goes, this is not really getting the cut through that I was told about. And the media goes, well, we don't know how to do it any different. And then it all shits itself. And that's what's happened in the last couple of weeks in particular. So the other thing that's been made very, very evident is that it is essential for New Zealand to have a public broadcaster that's well-funded and independent, where at the top of the apex, there is telling stories, whereas opposed to a commercial at the top of the apex, it's making profit because they have to pay for it. The actual idea about costing gets taken out of the equation about this story that we're reporting on, and it just comes down to what needs to be reported and telling New Zealand stories. That's become ever more evident over the last 10 days than it has before.
In terms of the last 100 days with government being and doing what they're doing with the coalition, do you feel that there has been sea change in the way that our media reports what the government is doing? Or how are they holding this government to account to the same way that they held the Labour government to account previously?
I think what media companies do, and TVNZ's included in this because they don't get public funding for their news broadcast. They get public funding for things like Q&A and that sort of thing, but for the 6 p.m. news and stuff, they don't. So they're still based on a commercial entity. It's a commercial model they're basing it on. So there are lots of people who were calling, reporter XYZ, a left-wing psyop before the election, who are now calling them friends of the right. And I would suggest that's one of two things. It either means they're doing their job correctly, so the fan of the left goes, why are they being so mean to the left now? Because that's just their reporting. Or it means they have as a part of their model, unspoken, of course, that they need to have the angle on that story that gets the most clicks, that gets them there. So are they being easier on this? I remember Jon Stewart on The Daily Show talking about Democrats versus Republicans, and it was when George W. Bush was in. And he was basically saying it was much easier to report on Republicans and make fun of it because they were so much more ludicrous than the left. Like when Democrats made stupid mistakes, they took the piss, right? But he was like, it's much easier to make jokes out of the Republicans because they make it easier. And it feels to me perhaps that National and ACT in particular, but New Zealand first, cupping from the rear, are actually making it easier for what we're doing. And I think what some of the media are doing to go, hole, there's a hole there, there's a hole. So I don't know if they're being harder on this government or this government's just making it easier for them to poke holes. I think it might be the latter, but probably in truth it's a combination of the two.
I hadn't actually thought of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. For me, it's a case of, I see the people who, before the election, left-wing Labour shills, now it's right-wing National Party shills and those sort of claims. And to me, that's an indication that we are actually getting relatively equal treatment of both. It's just, this is a new government making lots of changes, forcing things through, so there's a lot to feed through for the media to pick up on.
Well, I mean, if you have a look at what they've actually done in the first 100 days, we did a video on this last week. There's lots of little things they've done, but of their kind of big policies, the only thing new that they've done is ban cell phones in schools. That's it. Because other than that, they've cancelled and they've repeated. There's smoke-free, there's Three Waters, there's the Māori Health Authority, there's the Auckland fuel tax, there's the clean car discount. Cancel. Then they've gone back to gang patches and they've gone back to roads of significant interest, whatever it is. That's all stuff that's rear vision stuff, right? And then there's banning cell phones. So really, that first 100 days, as far as I can see it, from a new government bringing in new initiatives, what they've achieved in their first 100 days is banning cell phones. So I think about it that way, and it seems pretty pathetic. The other thing about their first 100 days is you think about this is now their shop front that they've set up for, and the amount of just putting... I know people don't like me using this because I think it's too not too graphic, but it's sort of I'm exaggerating, but it's putting the knee on the neck of Māori. The first 100 days, without question, has been just kidney punch after kidney punch after kidney punch to Māori. This is their shop front. What is the next 1,000 days, as you've been saying, going to look like? If this is like, hey, here's our foundation, it's pretty terrifying.
In terms of the next 1,000 days, do you have any predictions for what's going to happen in terms of our media? With the loss of News Hub, TVNZ downgrading, revenue seemingly dropping, and traditional media falling out of favour with the resources, like not having the resources they need to do what we need them to do, do you think for the next 1,000 days is government sitting back going, well, we're not going to be held to account, or crap, we need them there because the people who watch TV1 News are the people who vote for us?
Since the merger was talked about between RNZ and TVNZ, I've been a bit of a fan of the concept. A BBC type model, a genuine public broadcaster, no adverts on TV1, possibly one newsroom or perhaps just one bigger newsroom, so half people don't lose their jobs, but maybe it gets culled by a bit, or maybe a major newsroom in each of the centres, so staff can not lose their jobs but find a new place. And funnily enough, Melissa Lee was asked that in a stand-up during the week, and she was like a deer stuck in the headlights, and she refused to answer it in case it was something that might be in a cabinet paper. That's what she said. So I was like, well, that's a bit, is that foretelling a little bit? You won't talk to something in case maybe it might come in a cabinet paper in the future. So what
give it a week and it'll leak.
Well, New Zealand's such an interesting place as well. Like in the UK, when I was working in radio in 2008 when the global financial crisis hit, and I saw many of my colleagues and stuff just get dropped and gone and they disappeared. We saw newspapers the world over just shutting down. But then I think something like 6 newspapers in the UK shut down. But you have to remember there was 11 daily papers. Whereas in New Zealand, Auckland has the Herald, Waikato has the Waikato Times, Wellington has the Dom Post, or whatever they call it now, the Post. Then there's Christchurch Press, then there's the ODT. So like each centre has like a paper. So I think that's here to stay in some kind of form to talk about media. When it comes to, like I've had meetings at MediaWorks, I've talked about this on our show, meetings at MediaWorks, and you walk into their foyer, and I reckon their foyer costs them $300,000 just to make, right? And so, and we did this the other day, the News Hub jobs, right? The horrible thing that is 300 people are going to lose their jobs. If the average salary in New Zealand's close to 100K, let's just call it 100K, that's $30 million worth of just wages, minimum. Because, the guys at the top will be getting much more than 100K, but $30 million. So I think what you'll see is BHN and friends of BHN, like Spiderhoof and those people taking over the world, and Paul Barlow, because I think that we're not going anywhere because we'd like more budget, but we don't need it to do what we're doing. And one of kind of 2 or 3 things will happen. Either some of the mainstream media people hook into some of the more independents, which I do see as a possibility. Mainstream will just, pare back until it's a shadow of its form. Fair Go is a really good example. Fair Go's can be a couple of reporters' salaries. That's what Fair Go could be. And they could grab cameramen from the news pool, and, it doesn't have to be a 10 people, or maybe a couple of reporters and a couple of researchers or something. So for that to go, I'm like, sheesh, what was the budget for Fair Go? It must have been significant. And why does it need to be so significant? So maybe some of it will be looking at the media landscape and going, how do we do this better? How those of us in independent media, you're one, or I've worked for lots of sort of entry-level radio stations. We try and figure out how to do $1 million product on $100 budget. The mainstream media doesn't do that because they don't need to. It's becoming clear that they need to begin to need to do that. Can they do that? Are the overheads too big to even be able to do that? I don't know. So a very long-winded way, perhaps, Paul, of saying, I don't really know. I don't really know what's going to happen. Well, I mean, did anyone predict News Hub just disappearing? No. When COVID hit, did anyone just pick Radio Sport just going poof off one day? Yeah. Today FM gone. It's cutthroat. I've worked in that industry, and I haven't been a person who suffered that effect entirely. I was working primarily for News Talk ZB when the global financial crisis hit, and of course, talkback you can't have automated. You have to have someone there. So my position there was safe, but I was also doing part-time work for other NZME radio stations, and all of that went. So it all stopped. So I haven't been at the kind of like the sharp end of this is all stopping tomorrow, a whole media industry. And so I have always known though, and I've always said it's a very fickle industry, and anyone who has all of their eggs in that basket is risking quite a bit. And I know lots of people over there at MediaWorks, and I've been in touch with a lot of them, and they're all in shell shock, and the thing is, no one saw it coming. No one at MediaWorks saw it coming. No one saw it. Like some of them thought, there's going to be a paring back, but no one saw, lights are off on the 30th of June.
Yeah. We've had this interesting question come in actually that I've been asking myself this as well. Since we're more in the space of commentary on news, what happens if TVNZ and MediaWorks aren't the source of news anymore? How do we do our jobs?
Well, I mean, TVNZ will be a source of news. Yeah. But hypothetically, if they weren't, I mean, to be honest with you, every day the American news is flooding into my algorithm more and more and more. And I've been telling our audience that, second half of this year, I'm sure there's not going to be a majority of it. There's going to be American news coming up with their elections and that kind of stuff. But the answer to that question is there's lots of places to find news. I mean, I use other independent news organizations to show news sometimes. what you'll also find is all those people internationally who have decried the papers are dying. You know, the papers, they're dying, they're going to disappear. How often CNN will report things like first reported in the New York Times. So actually the newspapers and those journalists provide quite a important kind of entry point into a news story. So just because, you know, XYZ newspaper doesn't have video doesn't mean they don't have news that can't be turned into video commentary, I guess.
Do you see a point in the future where this government steps in and tries to help media?
Well, the thing that Melissa Lee didn't say might sort of might mean that it was. I guess the funny thing is what happened today. Oh yeah, there was that. No, I saw a headline. I haven't read it yet, so forgive me for the details. But the Jacinda Ardern documentary that's coming out, and this government's having to defend the funding, which I think is just freaking hilarious. Because this is the government, especially Winston and David Seymour, who's been poo-pooing. And so I saw a headline today, it might have been on Stuff, that basically said, government says, oh, here we go, it's right here, Film Commission. Look at this, I can probably do this. I know how this works. I've done this before. That one there, it's like that, see? And I can do that. Oh, you have to put it up though. Look, right there. Film Commission makes own decisions, government says. So this government's having to defend the Film Commission, whereas it's probably the same people who are taking the piss out of, was it called OK Chloe? That little documentary that came out, the documentary on Chloe Swarbrick. So the same people, I haven't read it entirely yet, but the same people who are probably defending this are possibly the same people who were accusing that because they have to, that they own it now. Like we talk a little bit, I think you got to take that down as well, bro. I've got any control here. We talk a little bit about David Seymour and, you know, what he brings through and what doors he opens. And like what doors you open, whatever breaks, you own. Even if you don't break it. Opening that door, if it breaks, you own it. And
did you see the interview with Bishop today?
I've listened to it while I was running the dog. I'm going to watch it again tomorrow morning, and it'll definitely be a part of tomorrow night's show.
Yeah, because that was a question that Jack Tame asked him. You know, what happens if your rushed legislation breaks something? And he didn't answer.
Yeah. No, look, I'm firmly in the camp of if you open the door and something gets broken, even if you don't break it, but because of the open door it's being broken, you own it. You own it being broken. And I think that I've talked with Bomber about that on the show, and he's actually said that to David Seymour in a certain capacity, that you're going to own it. You're going to own this stuff. And when it comes to do with some of the issues around, you know, race and the treaty and that kind of stuff at the moment, they're opening some pretty ugly doors. And if things break, they're going to own them. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm sorry to go on for so long, but I can remember a conversation. I think it was Phil Goff when he was in government. He was the head of the Minister for Armed Services for the Defence Force, whatever that was, and then he flipped and he was the spokesperson for the opposition because they lost, and they were talking about the Skyhawks, and I can remember, I can't remember who the other person was going from the other side, but I can remember the first time that I'm pretty sure it was Phil Goff. Phil Goff was in opposition. It felt like these two politicians had swapped seats, but they'd picked up the script that was left on the seat from the person who was just there. Because all of a sudden, the government minister who's in charge of the Defence Forces was saying what Phil Goff was saying before the election, and Phil Goff was saying and attacking the minister for what he was being attacked for before the election. And I think that Jacinda Ardern one about the Film Commission is one of those things where you'll see that the government is now defending something that they were very, very critical of before the election. It's a strange game they play.
How do you feel that the rise of the citizen journalist has impacted how people see media?
Well, I think I heard you earlier on. I've cut it out watching a little bit. I heard you earlier on mention invoke Chantal Baker's name, and I think about that with the anti-vax community and the disinformation doesn't, and that's impacted information hugely that people have had. You know, it seems that, and forgive me if I'm being a bit too flippant, but it feels to me, mind you, there's not many of us who are doing quite what we're doing on the left like this, but those on the right seem very, very keen to sort of poison the well for their audience. Whether it's genuine or not, only they can know that. And those that are doing this on the left seem to want to open doors and open people's eyes I mean, maybe that's because I'm on the left and I have a bias there, because I guess those on the right will be saying, well, we're just opening eyes as well. But, you know, I'm a bit of a critic of stupid ideas, and I will critique a stupid idea on the left. But I guess going full circle back to what John Stewart says, it just feels so much easier to do it to the Republicans, to the right, you know. So how has it affected it? I think overall probably negative, because there's more voices and more money, if we're honest, with those right-wing grifters who are poisoning the well. But equally, it opens an opportunity for more voices. The entry point to getting in is very, very low. You know, you can literally get your cell phone and you can be live streaming. You know, there's not a big border to cross to get there. And I think it will, if you look to America again, you know, most of us could probably list off 5 to 10 independent news shows from left or right. I don't know how big New Zealand is to do that, but I suspect there'll be a few more on the way, and perhaps that'll fill a bit of the gap where the news hubs are leaving, you know, maybe.
Makes sense. Any other final predictions for the next 1,000 days when it comes to our media landscape in this country? Or in general? Asteroid falling down from the sky, or
All Blacks at the next Rugby World Cup. I'm concerned. I'm really concerned, actually, because normally in politics, each side there'll be bluster and there'll be argument and they'll be, oh, you're useless and this, we're going to do that, and then they win, and then all kinds of simmers down. Whereas this NACDNZ government have actually ramped up. I mean, one of the things I didn't list off, and I saw some people in the chat mentioning it, was the smoking. I did say smoking. But, you know, that wasn't mentioned or pictured at all. That's going to literally kill thousands more New Zealanders. No one saw that coming. No one predicted that. No one had any idea. And it's purely because this government, every decision they're making, in my honest held belief, every decision they're making is to help them pay for the tax cuts they promised, and want to give their base, their donors. Because why are they pushing so hard to cut money? And it concerns me, because if that's your basis, like we talked about the triangle for news, right? If the point of your triangle is, you know, repaying your funders, then that's terrifying. And even if it's not, if repaying the funders is somewhere up on the high edge of your ladder, you know, that's terrifying. I find that to be a terrifying concept. And if they continue on with what was seen in the first 100 days, which is far worse than what they were promising. They didn't simmer down, they went the other way. The first 100 days is far worse than they were promising before the election. Then it does fill me with extreme concern, and extreme concern for Indigenous issues and the most vulnerable. I mean, to be honest, most of us who are sort of middle class, middle age, you know, I'm not saying wealthy or anything, but not having to fight off 150 other families to get a 3-bedroom house somewhere at exorbitant rates, probably aren't going to be impacted that much. But the most vulnerable and minority groups, they're the ones that I'm fearful for. And if we're only as good as our weakest link, or our weakest community, or our most vulnerable community, then that would say to me the next 1,000 days we're going to be a pretty weak country.
I'm seeing an awful lot of comments from people who are really depressed by the stream. Yay! Done something right. Do you have a positive prediction for the next 1,000 days?
Chloe Swarbrick.
That's a good point. Yeah, big news for her today.
Pretty exciting to see what she does. I'm very keen to get her on our show and have a chat with her. Obviously, we've already approached them, because we did talk last year about maybe she's better as a rover, not being kind of lumbered down with leadership. I think that as Chloe has said publicly and said when she came on with us before Christmas, this is the most representative, she didn't say far left, because, you know, but whatever, but progressive number of MPs there's ever been. There's never been more, if you include Te Pāti Māori, which are definitely in that camp now. At one stage they were like, could they go with National? But they're definitely in that progressive left space now. This is the biggest progressive left there's ever been. I don't think anytime soon we'll see the Greens overtake Labour as the number one left party, but I do seeing it continue to grow. Seems to be, we always talk about those policies that New Zealanders hold on to and they refuse to let them go, you know, and they're all left-wing policies. Like we ask this question all the time: what's a policy from the right? What's a law or legislation from the right that everyone holds on to as tightly as they do things like interest-free student loans, working for families, health systems, state housing? There's nothing. There's nothing. That's why the left responds to a policy the right responds to policy whilst the left makes policy. So the more progressive people we get into government means the more progressive policies we'll see in government, because even if Labour is the bigger party, they will still need to form a coalition because they wasted their majority last time. And I think that there's a positive from there, which is this is a launching pad for the progressive left. There you go. There's a positive for the next 1,000 days. And get on Chloe's back and ride her all the way to the progressive future.
I think that's a perfect place to end this. Thank you very much, Pat. Very much appreciated. It's a shame Chewy. I actually saw your stream on Thursday where Chewy's like, I should come along. He should have, but I was busy talking to someone and couldn't leave a message.
I messaged him. He's having dinner with people tonight. So.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and if he came on here, I wouldn't have gotten a word in because he just talks too much. So.
Good point. Yeah,
but he is everyone's favourite, and he will be back tomorrow night. So that's all good.
Brilliant. So people can find you online here on YouTube, obviously. Where else can they grab you?
Oh, we're all over the place. If you follow on TikTok and Twitter, I'm at Pat Brittenden. This DOCNZ Studios on whatever that thing's called. What are we on now? This YouTube, the tubing you.
This is YouTube and Facebook. Yeah.
Big Hero News on Facebook. We're all over the place.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Pat. Have a great night.
Kapai. See you, Paul.
See ya. Right, that's it. Went a little over time by like 20 minutes, but I want to thank everybody who joined me on the show tonight. Louise, Will, Shannon, Holly, and Pat. It was a really interesting perspective to see what they brought to the table and what they're seeing happen at the moment. I think it's pretty fair to say the first 100 days have left a lot of us in shock because it feels like a 100-day tornado. And there are people who have dealt with things like storms that over the last sort of 12 months that know what that feeling is like when you hear there's another storm coming and you have to batten down and deal with it. And that's a lot of what people are feeling at the moment in terms of policies and what the future holds. But that doesn't mean that you should give up. You should be making sure that you are constantly writing to your MPs and making sure that your elected officials know what's important to you. Have your voice heard as much as possible. Share content that you agree with and tell the people around you how policy changes that are being implemented impact you, because they might not necessarily know that. They might just be sitting there thinking, I'm a landlord with 7 houses and I get backdated tax refunds, instead of going, I'm a person who's struggling to put food on the table and pay for the power and make sure that the rent is sorted because the government has cut the amount of money that I get. So make sure you're talking to people about what's going on. We've got 1,000 odd days of this, which means it's a long haul, but we can do it together and we can work together to make sure people's voices are heard, to make sure that people's opinions are known, and that when this government does something that is really horrible, that it does something that people feel is wrong, undemocratic, or un-New Zealand-like, we can hold them to account and let people know what's going on. So that's what I'm going to leave you on, trying to be positive. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me. I will look at doing this again at some point in the future, maybe on a weekend that hasn't been quite so hectic. Enjoy the rest of your night, everybody. Thank you very much.